Gentlemen, once again we are with you with the subject very topical, very important, and as security professional, we must be aware of geopolitics and what is happening all around us. And with that objective in mind, we have organized a discussion which is based on a book, and that book shares many important aspects which security professionals must know. Today we are having discussion with the author of book The Russian Ukraine War Lessons Learned. This book is authored by Major General Dr. G.D. Bakshi, and this discussion is organized by International Council for Industrial Security and Safety Management, which is in forefront in professionalizing the professionals. The sheer intensity, scale, and duration of the Russian-Ukraine war marks a significant paradigm shift in every way. The very nature of war fighting in the current era has undergone a tremendous change. Conflict now closely resembles the titanic battles and carnages of the First World War, or even the grinding battles of attrition that marked the closing stages of the Second World War. Most military analysts feel that we are witnessing a pivotal moment in military history, the ascendance of alliances as the decisive form of war. The labels of battlefield transparency today are simply unprecedented. The surprise impossible to achieve makes it very uh, sobering, and of course the kind of effect which will be impregnated and imprinted in everyone's mind. The author of this book, Dr. General G.D. Bakshi, I am proud and privileged to introduce him. General G.D. Bakshi is Chana Medal and Visis Seva Medal awardee. Mostly generals are known for their exploits in the battles as at the borders and elsewhere in internal security situations, and as the savior whenever calamities occur. And this general is remarkably different than the stereotype generals we have seen. This general, while wielding the proverbial sword, has also wielded a pen, and he has proved that his pen is as mighty as his sword was. He has authored no less than 42 books. This is the 41st book which we are reviewing today. There is another book which is going to be released. This book is available on Amazon, and I have shared the link in the description box. Sir, Jal Bakshi sir, good morning, and we are privileged to have you with this discussion, the book which you have authored. And I know that on television there are many self-declared security expert, defense analyst, and strategic affairs matters they claim to have mastered. But you chose to write a book, and seeing the expert comments and reading the expert comments are hundred and thousand ways different than what they appear to be. It is easy to watch TV, but difficult to buy the book and read it. So, what compelled you to write this book, and why this is a must read for security professionals and those who uh, practice the geo politics and strategic affairs? They try to learn and explore. Why you think that writing this book was so important for you?
Teresa, I firstly would like to thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity to reach out to a larger, more erudite audience on a seminal issue of concern to all of us as security analysts, as national security experts. And this is the topic of the Russia Ukraine war. And this is this book. Russia-Ukraine war lessons learned. It's been taken out by Knowledge World, and uh, in terms of timeliness, I don't think there is any other subject which could be more important than the one at hand of the Russia-Ukraine war. This is the longest conflict in recent history. It is already into its second year. It was launched in February last year. It's almost completed a year, and it is nowhere close to completion. It is only likely to intensify and get more sharp in the months ahead. Why is it important to us in India in particular? It is important to militaries all over the world who are on a daily basis studying the conduct of operations, the lessons learned, the weapon usage profile, and which weapon has performed how. It is a critical matter for the whole world. But for India, it is of seminal importance, Tyagi Saab, because of the simple fact that 70% of our cutting edge military equipment that we use in the Indian armed forces, whether our jet fighters, whether the MiG 21, the Sukhoi 30s, the various aircraft that we have from the Russian stable, or whether it is our ground forces in terms of our 70% of our tank fleet is T-72 tank, which we are manufacturing under license. This is the tank that has been most used in Ukraine. T-72s, T-90 tanks, 130 millimeter guns, etc. BrahMos cruise missile. I mean, all these, the entire stable of weapons that Russia is using is what we have in our armed forces, whether it is the Kashin class destroyers, whether it is the missile brigades, the Moskova, you know, all these weapon systems are what we have in our armed forces. Therefore, it is very vital for us to keep a track of what exactly has been the performance of these weapon systems. We can't go by the propaganda that is being churned out on a daily basis by the Western press. That is more to sell Western weapons. Sometimes we are told that the war winning factor is the Stinger missile. Next day we are told it is the Javelin missile. Now we are told it is the HIMAR rocket launchers by themselves. They will win this war. Then it was the Barkatyar, the Turkish drone, which was being touted as a war winning factor. The fact of the matter is that the world seems to have gone back to the era of the Second World War in terms of scale, duration, intensity. This war is exactly like the First or the Second World War. We were given to understand that because of the nuclear backdrop, no conflict could last more than 7 days, 10 days, 14 days at best. When we were even fighting the Bangladesh war. There was a lot of pressure on us from the Russians ki jaldi finish it up, we can't hold on longer. The world will pile on you and enforce a ceasefire. And therefore, you have to finish it in 10 days, 14 days, and we finished that war in 14 days. Similarly, when we were fighting in Kargil, they said, look, if you cross the international border, maximum you will be allowed to fight for 7 days, 10 days, 14 days. So short duration, high intensity wars were supposed to be the norm because otherwise they would cross the nuclear threshold. This war is now into its second year and there is no end in sight. And Russia is the country with the largest number of nuclear warheads, 6,300. Ukraine may not have any nuclear warhead. It had to give up all its nuclear warhead when it became an independent country. But it is backed by the United States. It is backed by the whole of NATO. And this is the most heavily armed nuclear nations in the world fighting a proxy war. Therefore, there are very, very, very seminal, very important lessons for the Indian context and which are particularly important. You see, we had inherited armed forces which were organized on the patterns of the Second World War. The British Indian Army, from which we trace our lineage, had fought World War One, they had fought World War Two, and the organization they had left behind was largely based upon war fighting in World War Two. Then, since then, the world has evolved a hell of a lot, you see, and the Americans, the basic organization in World War Two was the infantry division. That is World War One, World War Two. Ever since the time of Napoleon, you had the world military organizations had all crystallized around the division, which is an orchestra of all arms. I mean, a division has infantry, it has armor, it has artillery, it has engineers, it has the support logistic systems ingrained, inbuilt. So, from the time of Napoleon, that had come out to be the prime fighting organizations of all arms combined into one. Then the Americans started saying, no, no, the division is too big, we don't need it, we need to go to brigade. Or unki dekha dekhi, following the American, because whatever the Americans do, the rest of the world follows. I mean, so the NATO countries and a lot of other armies, even the Chinese started going from the divisions to the brigades, you know. And also in our country, General Bipin Rawat wanted to start converting our divisions to brigades because, we wanted to keep up with the latest and with the Joneses, etc., and to follow what is militarily fashionable, that it is no longer the era of long wars, it is the era of short, intense border wars, etc., etc. Now, all that is gone for a six. It's gone for a toss. By the way, do you know that the Russians are coming back to the division as the basic orchestra? They had also changed to brigades as the basic fighting arm, and they had also changed to the Ukrainians are fighting in terms of brigade, you know, and the Russians want to go back to the infantry division. The prime lesson of World War One and World War Two, was artillery is the war winning factor. Now, the lesson that has emerged, very clearly from this war is that it is artillery which is the war winning factor, right? And the Ukrainians have not asked of course, the Americans are supplying the stingers and the javelins, etc. And the Ukrainians said, dete jao, till, they have almost exhausted the reserve stocks of America and NATO. But the fact of the matter is, what the Ukrainians are asking for is artillery, and that too medium artillery, right, as the critical war winning factor. Now, I don't want to go by hype and propaganda. As a military expert, it is my business to look for the truth. It is to look for empirical facts. Now, the Austrian army has carried out an operational research statistical analysis study of the fighting that has taken place between Russia and Ukraine over the last 7 years, especially in the Donbass region, where the Luhansk and the Donetsk provinces are. I mean, heavy fighting has been going on for the last 7 years. Now, based on an operational research statistical analysis study of this fighting, they have come to the conclusion that the maximum casualties have been inflicted by medium artillery. And when I say medium artillery, I would mean 130 millimeter, 152 millimeter, 155 millimeter caliber and above. Even heavy artillery is being used. 203 millimeter guns have been used by the Russians and also some by the Ukraine, right? So the fact of the matter is that 45% of the tank kills have been inflicted by medium artillery. Over 60% of the kills on the artillery in counter battery fire have been done by the medium artillery, right? Vehicles, almost 50% plus done by the medium artillery. What is the percentage inflicted by anti-tank guided missiles like Stingers, etc.? 13%, right? And by tank versus tank, it is 14%. Therefore, it is
You made the
quite clear
observation.
that
At this point, you made
yes,
the observation that
uh,
sans surprise and given the very high levels of lethality of precision guided munitions, PGMS, Most
That's right.
attacks result in very heavy casualties in men and material and result in
That's
carnage
right.
and stalemates, with little
That's
to show for effort and resources expended. Uh,
correct.
this observation is very, very profound and very accurate. But then, when you started, the discussion, you mentioned a phrase, and I am still, struggling to find whose proxy war is it. You mentioned about the proxy war, and
Uh,
I also would like you to explain: is it not the living example of hybrid warfare? So one is proxy war, and then hybrid warfare. Probably all the elements of hybrid warfare have been used in this Ukraine-Russian war.
of
Your
course,
comment.
you see, the fact of the matter is that 10 years back, there is the Russian chief of the general staff, General Gerasimov. He's still around in Russia because the generals serve for very long eras. They just don't retire. So, General Gerasimov had come out with a hybrid war doctrine, which is not something that the Russians are working on. The Americans have started working on this long time back. So were the Chinese. They're all working on this thing. The Russians call it the whole of government warfare. That means every arm of the government will be used to wage war, and that includes cyber warfare, that includes information warfare, psychological warfare, economic warfare, etc., etc., trade warfare. All this biological warfare is also now part of it, and the use of weapons of mass destruction also, gets all integrated into legal warfare, media warfare, as the Chinese call it. That becomes hybrid war. But what this war has put out a very clear lesson is the Russians started this as a hybrid war. But when they attacked on 24th of February with 150,000 troops, it had switched from regular war to full scale war. The biggest mistake the Russians have made is they are still waging it as a hybrid war. Whereas Ukraine, America switched to full scale war. Full scale war. You see? And the Russians, let me explain what I mean. The Russians said this is a limited operation. The Russians said this is a special military operation. This is what Putin said, right? That I am launching a special military operation to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine. So what he meant was it is not a full-scale war, and therefore there was no need for full-scale mobilization. The Ukrainians mobilized fully. From about 2 lakhs army that they are today at 7 lakhs, right? In uniform. All of them may not be fully trained to fight. About 400,000 are fully trained to fight. The Russians started the attack with 1,50,000, and till almost November, they refused to increase their force level. What this war has clearly shown is that numbers count. God is always on the side of the big battalion. The Russians were thinking that their technological superiority will make up for lack of numbers. Well, it did for a certain time. And thereafter, what you have realized with a shock is that you do need manpower. You need mass and you need high tech. You see, what this war has shown is that it is not only high tech that will win you war, because there was a pernicious theory, a doctrine going on. Oh, we only need high tech. Who needs manpower? Manpower is a waste of money, waste of resources. So downsize the Indian army. Are you aware, Tyagi Saab, that in the last 2 years, 3 years of COVID, the Indian army has been downsized by 2 lakhs? The, 1 second, 1 second.
While you return back to the discussion, I got some observation from a viewer, which is displayed here, and this viewer says that
Sorry, sorry,
the
sorry. Sorry.
Yes, please. Join
Oh
and
yeah.
continue while you make your orientation of the screen.
One
I
second.
was
One second.
referring to,
I am.
please,
Oh,
I was referring to
one
observation which
second.
is
One
made by
second.
one of the viewer, and it is about the comparison of Ukraine
Oh,
war with Bangladesh. And the viewer has made the observation that every war has certain good. Russia has made it clear that their aim is to demilitarize Ukraine. A quick war suited India in Bangladesh war. So,
right.
yes, once again, sir, you are with us. And
Right. Right. बोलिए.
yeah, so there was one observation which I read for the benefit of viewers, but then you are requested to continue what you were discussing before short.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Please, sir.
So what I'm saying is that it has become the era of high tech and mass. This is what it was at the end of Second World War. Hundreds of divisions were used by both sides. So we find that Russia tried to rely only on technology, and they could do it for 5 months, 6 months. Then their troops started suffering, overstretch, overstrain, and you found Ukraine, a country half the size, was able to launch offensives in Kherson, launch offensives in Kharkiv, and gain back territory. Russia was forced to mobilize. As you are aware, they have had to call up 3 lakh reservists. 80,000 of them have already been pushed to the front to stabilize the front. And the Russians have been able to stop all Ukrainian attacks. Now the Russians are training 2 lakh versus their reservists. And the plan was that earliest they could launch a counter offensive in either January or in February, March. Major Russian counteroffensive is coming. So, what we have to understand is in our army from 1990, this is very important. So, please give me a little bit of time here. I'll take on that question of Bangladesh a little later. But the most crucial issue that I'm saying is in our army, there have been two views. One view is cut manpower to buy technology. Reduce revenue budget to increase your capital budget, with the help of which you can buy new weapons, new equipment. This is not new. In the 1990s, in the time of General Ved Malik, the country, if you are aware, 1990 our economy had come close to collapse. 91 the Soviet Union had collapsed. Our source of cheap weapons completely dried up overnight, and we were in serious problems. That time the government said we have no money to give you till our GDP increases. So please make do with what you have. Therefore, we had to lump a lot of Pakistani provocations in Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. And therefore, a case was taken up to downsize manpower and to get that from that money released, buy more weapons. Suppression of manpower, it was called. It was suppressed by first 50,000, then by another 50,000, and then Kargil came, and we got a shock. All the units that you had disbanded, mules, GS, mules, artillery, pioneer companies, you had to stop the disbandment orders, get them back. At the end of the Kargil war, you had to raise 36 new battalions of Rashtriya rifles, because when you are fighting in the mountains, you need manpower. To fight a war, if you have to attack normally in the plain, you need 1:3 ratio. If you have to attack in the mountains, you need 1:9, 1:10, sometimes even more. So how can you cut manpower? You see, you will have to have both mass and manpower, and that has again been proved. Unfortunately, we were going to the view that technology is the war-winning factor, only war-winning factor, and this manpower is faltu, it is a waste. So we have downsized our army by 2 lakhs by simply stopping recruitment during COVID. Every year, Tyagi Saab, 60,000 soldiers retire. You know it, I know it. So 1 year, 1,20,000, and this is the third year. So we have 1,80,000, almost close to 2 lakh soldiers you have reduced from your armed army. With the threat that you are facing from China, from Pakistan, can you afford to do it? My simple point is, Pakistan had 4 strike force. Army Reserve North, Army Reserve South, 11 Corps, 12 Corps. We had only 3 strike corps. That was 1 Corps, 2 Corps, and 21 Corps. Right? Now the simple fact is, 1 Corps, we have to shift to the China front. So you are left with 2 strike corps to face 4 Pakistani strike corps. So the fact is, you need to raise more rather than cut. And if you had any doubt, the Russia-Ukraine war has showed you the need for manpower. In the absence of manpower, Russia has suffered and has been forced to now mobilize and add 3 lakh more troops to its army while the fighting is on. Here in India, we had the manpower, we are cutting it. So what will you do when the war starts? Start raising, mobilizing like the Russians? This is the
At this
biggest
point, sir,
lesson to emerge from this war.
at this point, sir,
Biggest
if
lesson.
you permit, I'm tempted to make a mention here that if we think
Yes,
that
yes.
technology is going to solve all our problem, then either we do not understand the technology or we do not understand the problems. So heavily depending on the technology, weaponry, and all what technology is offering for warfare, forgetting the manpower is a big mistake for which any country would pay very dearly. My question at
Right.
this point, my request to you at this point is, though it is very difficult for defense analysts to pinpoint and say very clearly, now in this whole now 1 year long war, who is right and who is wrong?
Look, Tyagi Saab, the simple fact is that if you go by Western propaganda and psyops and information warfare, Russia is the aggressor, Russia is the aggressor. But I'm afraid it's not as simple as all that. NATO, when the Soviet Union broke up in 91, the then Foreign Secretary of the United States had assured Russia that there would be not 1 inch eastward expansion of NATO. Since then, they have expanded and expanded and expanded, and they have taken 14 countries home, Eastern Europe, etc., into NATO. They are on the borders of Russia. Russia was extremely worried. They said, now that the Warsaw Pact has been dissolved, why do you need NATO? But NATO, instead of being dissolved, has been expanding, expanding, expanding. They have reached the borders of Russia. Then Russia warned that our red lines are Georgia and Ukraine. 2008, they had a coup created in Ukraine and they brought in a very Russian leader, right? And then the Russians reacted. 4 days they took over Georgia. 2014, you had that Maidan revolution, which overthrew the duly elected government of Ukraine, right? And the Russians then reacted. They moved into the Russian-speaking provinces of Donbass and they captured Crimea. They were already in Crimea, they just took it over. Had they gone at that time, they could have repeated Georgia in Ukraine. But they just stopped at Crimea and this thing, Donbass. right? So the fact of the matter is, since then, the Americans, the NATO, started a military build-up in Ukraine, made it very strong, started needling Russia, kept needling Russia. They held a 14-nation naval exercise just opposite their base in Crimea. They pumped in weapons to this. Then they were holding a military exercise there, and the Russians were had intelligence that they wanted to launch a counter attack in Donbass, and NATO would have gotten involved in that. So the Russians preempted. They had no option but to preempt. Look, Pakistan has been making itself as a base for causing problems for India. So anybody who wants to create problems for India, they are willing to rent their territory. Like if the CIA wants to create problems in Punjab, the Pakistani ISI is very willing to help. And you know what they were doing in J&K, and they are still doing. So the simple fact of the matter is they have been helping the Indian Mujahideen, Popular Front, etc., etc., etc. So if Pakistan sets itself up as a military base against India, India is justified in attacking Pakistan, as we did in 65, as we did in 71. So on the same analogy, the Russians are fully justified in attacking Ukraine, because in Ukraine, 34 biological warfare labs had been set up to do corona warfare, bird flu warfare against Russia. So which country will take it lying down? I mean, only India is the Gandhian country which doesn't like to attack, but the Russians have preempted.
You are very right, sir. Those countries which are part of NATO, they find Russia as aggressor. But all the defense analysts I interacted in India are strongly see uh, Russians' logics, Russians' justification, and reasons to have this war initiated for simple reason that no country would like to have aggressor right bang on their borders. Historically, India never shared a border with China. Today, because that buffer was removed, India
That
shares 3,400 kilometers long border full of claims and counterclaims and disputes all along. So we know where it pinches, why it is going to hurt Russian interest. But then back to uh, those lessons which entire world must learn.
learn.
The understanding of this Ukraine Russian warfare analysis is into few lessons which you have in detail explained in your books. Can you summarize few of those lessons which country
Yes,
must learn,
yes,
especially in India?
yes. First is the criticality of military manpower. What this conflict has shown is that conscripts have fared very poorly. Short-term inductees who come for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever, they don't integrate well with their units. They are not well trained. Their motivation to fight is not as high as regular troops, because he knows he has to go back and look for another job. So his motivation to fight has not proved to be very good. Of all conscripts, has not proved very good in the Russia-Ukraine war. We are now going in for Agniveers. We might have to take a relook. We may have to lengthen the term of engagement of the Agniveers from 4 years to 7. Incidentally, when you and I we fought the 71 war, the Jawans had a color service of 7 years, in which he could integrate to the unit, be fully trained, and he did very well on the battlefield, and yet retain a youthful profile, which is one of the aims of the Agniveer scheme. Keep a youthful profile for the armed forces. But you have to balance youthful profile with military experience. So, keeping the results of the Russia-Ukraine war, I think we may need to relook at the duration of the Agniveer scheme and the numbers that you are retaining. Right now it is 25%. I think it should be increased to 50%. Within the same army, you can't have two radically different streams. One gets 1 month of annual leave, the other gets 2 months of annual leave. One gets so much pay, gets pension, the other does not. No, so this could, at a previous time, generate management problems. So I think we might as well learn from the Russia-Ukraine war. That's not lesson number one. Second is the criticality of medium artillery. When I was in the MO directorate at the time of the Kargil war and afterwards, there was a plan to mediumize the Indian artillery, right? That means around the 155 caliber. We then had and we still have plethora of calibers. 75-24, Howitzer, 105, IFG, 105 Indian gun, वगैरह. Then we had 130, 122 millimeter Russian gun, 130 millimeter Russian gun. Then we had the 155 millimeter Bofors. So, the plan was to standardize around one caliber, that is the 155 millimeter caliber, which had proved so good in the Kargil war. Even in 71 war, the 130 millimeter guns had done wonders, medium guns. But we now had the 155, which proved to be the war-winning factor in Kargil, shook the Pakistanis out. Now the problem is that it is almost 30 years plus after that war, but we still haven't mediumized. Only within the last, when this government came, then we bought about roughly 200 of these M777 American Howitzer 155. Then we bought the Vajra gun from Korea, which we made about 150, and we are going to add some more now because they proved very good. And the good news is that India has now developed the Dhanush, which is a variant of the 155 Bofors, and we have developed the ATAC, Advanced Towed Artillery Gun System, designed by the DRDO and made in India by Bharat Kalyani Forge and Tata's. This is a world beater gun. This gun has a range of 48 kilometers compared to the American equivalent Howitzer 155 gun, which has a range of 45. The rate of fire is 5 rounds a minute compared to the American 3 rounds a minute. It is an electrical, propulsion unit which doesn't make noise like the one which is piston driven in the other guns, even in the Bofors. So the auxiliary propulsion unit is superior, the range is superior. This Indian gun is fantastic. I'm surprised, I was shocked when initially there was a lot of resistance from our artillery itself that we don't want it, we want foreign guns, we want Israeli gun, we want this gun. Why this gun is too heavy? What is the 21 ton? So therefore, they said it can't go to Ladakh, it can't go to Plateau, Karen Plateau in Sikkim. Nonsense. If 45-ton tanks can go there, why can't this gun go there? Thank God all those objections have now been overruled, and the government has said you can't buy foreign. Now, my advice, the greatest lesson learnt is the greatest lesson is that we must mediumize our artillery as fast as possible. We must get about 1,800 of these ATAC guns, and we must replace all the existing calibers with the 155. So this has proved to be the most lethal in the Russia-Ukraine war. This is what won the Mariupol for them. This is what won the the cities of Donetsk and in the Donbass. Whatever gain the Russians made was because of this artillery. And the Ukrainians have been asking for only one thing. They want this kind of artillery system and the multi-barrel rocket launcher system. We have the Pinaka, they have got the HIMARS now. And you know the damage the HIMARS are doing? They just killed about 70 Russians yesterday. So we need to strengthen our artillery at the most accelerated pace. Then,
Thank you.
is the precision guided munition as also drone. You see the way the Russians have hammered Kyiv and all the other cities, knocked out their power generation plants and their water systems, created serious problems. They have used the Shahid Iranian drones, which they have retrofitted with their GLONASS navigational aid system. Something like the GPS, the Russian GPS. So, with the help of that, they have created a barrage of these drones. Now, these drones may not be very lethal because the charge is a little less. But when you combine it with the Russian cruise missiles like the calamities, tactical ballistic missile like the Iskander, these mask the main missile, right? Because you have to expend fire of so many air defense missiles to shoot down every single Shahid that is coming. Iranian one, which is quite cheap. This is a self-destruct kamikaze drone. So, what you find is that you can't afford to lose manned aircraft, which cost you so much. The shifting is entirely to cruise 3,000, 1,800, cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, etc., and hypersonic missiles have been fired by the Russians so far. And they are firing every day and causing huge amount of damage. So we may have to shift to this, shift emphasis from manned aircraft. The Russians have not been able to use their manned aircraft. The S-400 system has proved pretty effective, but not as effective as it was thought to be. They have not been able to stop all air attacks. So, you can't let go of other means of air defense. More shoulder-fired missiles are required, like the Stinger. They have done their share of damage, though they are not by themselves the war-winning factor. It is the S-300 of the Russian missiles which the Ukrainians are using, which have done a fair amount of damage. The Russians just did not use their air force. The number of
At the
sorties by the Russian air force was 250 per day. We in the 71 war had put 460 per day sorties we were able to generate. And the Americans had used 1,600 sorties per day in the Gulf War 1 and 2. So, quite obviously, the Russian model of using air power has turned out to be seriously flawed. One of the things is total battlefield transparency. You see, the Americans have 75 military satellites, Americans and NATO, over the battlefield right now in Russia, Ukraine, and 200 civilian satellites. Every single Russian soldier, tank, truck, gun that moves is picked up. For example, the Russians were withdrawing from Kherson. Kharkiv. I'm talking of Kharkiv. They were withdrawing from Kharkiv. American satellites, NATO satellites picked it up, passed it on to Ukraine. They said, quickly attack. So they got 3 brigades together, attacked, and they captured the whole of Kharkiv within a matter of days. Now, you see, had the war directly been between Russia and America, you see, America and Russia both have anti-satellite weapons. The Chinese have them, so do we. One of the first things you may have to do in the next war is use anti-satellite weapons to knock out enemy recon satellites. Blast holes in the sky. so that you can gain surprise. Now the Russians can't do that because the American satellites are flying freely, merrily, because it is a proxy war. The Americans are fighting the Russians to the last Ukrainian, and Zelensky doesn't seem to realize it. Like
Right, sir.
a monkey, he is playing to the gallery while his country is getting destroyed
Sir.
and more
Uh,
destruction is coming.
right, sir. In fact, at this point, again, I would share with our viewers that this book is available at Amazon, and to buy this book, link is given in the description box. You in this book have summarized that the in the dynamics between offense and defense, between tank and anti-tank weapons, between aircraft and air defense systems, we are seeing a new equilibrium that clearly favors defense over offense.
Over the other.
Singular artillery has
Exactly.
once again become the critical war winning factor, just as it was in the two world war.
That
These are few lessons I have summarized for the benefit of our viewers, and they can always refer the link for other professionals and those who are interested in such affairs and discussions on warfare, military strategy, and defense analyst. I really feel very privileged and proud to have discussion with you. That opportunity you very graciously permitted me to avail, and I request you to once again permit us to have another discussion. At the summary of this discussion, I would like to share with our viewers that what has been so far discussed, that leads to a point where then Bakshi was mentioning that some way we feel that either Zelensky is too stupid to understand that he is being used, or his using is so cleverly mechanized by the NATO countries and especially Americans that he is not realizing. And as famously it is said that it is not over till it is over. And finally, let us remember that war decides not who is right, but who is left. What is left is amidst rumbles of once a prosperous country, rambling of a cherubic face with the idiotic smile. What is left is crumbling edifices of great infrastructures, ruined economy, devastated landscapes, and very traumatized citizens. What is left is a moron leader, unmindful of miseries of its own citizens, and he is hiding behind false nationalism. World must see that this war must end. Next discussion, gentlemen, our viewers must have this in mind when they make a
may I just
review
add
of.
a point?
Okay, fine. Permit, sir. Permit me to share the
Just
screen.
thank you, Tyagi Saab. Uh, The simple fact is that this war must end. I totally endorse that sentiment because the global economy is facing a recession. Not only recession, it will also be hit by stagflation. There is inflation caused by the runaway rise in energy prices, fertilizer prices, food prices. The countries like Sri Lanka have already faced ruin. Pakistan is next. So many South American countries, so many Middle Eastern countries, so many African countries could be looking at economic ruin, right? And all this desire to destroy Russia economically has backfired. It is today Europe which is suffering the maximum because of the
Right.
sanctions they have put. These have boomerang. The ruble had fallen from 80 rubles to a dollar to almost 160 rubles. Today it is back at 60 rubles to a dollar. It is the best performing currency against the dollar. De-dollarization might take place because the countries are now shaken. because of
Sure.
the way the Western countries are imposing sanctions,
Sure.
weaponizing their banking system, weaponizing their dollar. All the Russians had 650 billion foreign exchange reserve. 300 was in American and European banks. They have just been grabbed. So which country would like to put its money in these banks? Global trust has taken
So,
a big hit. Therefore,
sure.
we need to stop this war, have a ceasefire. But the Americans will not let it happen. They want to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. That is, I think, immoral.
So, next discussion, sir, we will be having from experts from NATO country, and let's see their perspective. They're looking at and analyzing this war. But then, before that happens, I request you to give us opportunity to discuss about your next book, which is again going to change the entire concept and perception of our Sanatan historical evidences, which you have very rightly brought out to forefront and given a twist to so far false narrative being created that Aryans were invaders. I really thank you very much, sir, and close this discussion and
Thank,
wait for next opportunity you provide. So thank you very
thank,
much.
thank you so much.